to discuss that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your patience. This meeting of the Preservation Board is now in order. I'm going to call a roll. Commissioner Richardson, are you here? Here. Commissioner Colleen, are you here? Commissioner Byzantiner, are you here?
Here.
Chairman Kennedy, are you here?
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton, are you here?
Here.
Commissioner Vines, are you here?
Here.
I am here. Did I overlook a commissioner? I did not. Commissioners, has anybody seen the minutes from the last meeting?
Move we approve. Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Commissioners, taking a look at our agenda. Anybody have any problems with this agenda? Okay, then we will proceed with this agenda and call agenda item A, 215 York Avenue.
I am Jan Cameron from the Cultural Resources Office, and this is a preliminary review application to demolish an existing non-contributing building on this site in the Central West End Historic District for the construction of a new hotel. And I have a couple of things to pass out. One is, well, a number of samples of the facade materials, and a letter from the Central West End Development Committee that's reviewed the project and is generally in support with a request that the exterior materials be further considered. However, they anticipate satisfactory resolution of their outstanding concerns. So as I said, this is the site. It is on York Avenue, which is not a highly traveled street. And this is the site. It's the existing building on the southern end of the parcel. And this is the footprint of the building. You can see that it will be directly adjacent to York House that faces on Lindbergh. And it will also be adjacent to the rears of the buildings that face Maryland Plaza, which you'll see in this moment. This is the proposed elevation for the front. The staff is in favor of the design. We do have a concern about the exterior materials, more particularly that there should be additional brick or some other quality material on the front. This is the south elevation that will be adjacent to York, and the north elevation at an existing alley. And then the rear. A rendering of York Avenue facade. We're looking southwest here. That's the York House on the far left. Another rendering from the parking garage that's opposite on York Avenue. And the rear elevation. And I should point, oops, sorry, go this way, that the darker area on the right is brick. The rest of it is a cementitious panel, and that's the samples that you're seeing in front of you right now. And then the metal with a wood finish will be on the first story horizontally, and also the sign that goes up. Right. Okay. This is a proposed, well, another building using the same cementitious material. This is the current connection between this building, which was constructed as a warehouse building and then became a radio studio. And it is non-contributing under the standards, as I said. This is the site. And they will be reusing a curb cut and the alley to access their parking at the rear. So there will be no new curb cut required. And this is the context on Maryland Avenue, Maryland Plaza. This is the opposite context on York. It's York House on the left. And that's the context along Lindell. So again, other than asking for additional upgraded material on the front elevation, the staff is recommending that the board grant preliminary approval to the project.
Questions on this end?
No.
Questions on this end? Thank you. Alderwoman Navarro?
Thank you very much. I'm Heather Navarro, the Alderwoman for the 28th Ward, and I've had the pleasure of meeting with the development team and the architect on this project, as well as with the Planning and Development Committee for the Central West End Association. And like many of the neighbors in this area, I can say I'm excited to see this project move forward. I've been impressed with the understanding of the historical context by the development team and also their level of engagement with the local neighbors. So I am here to express my support to the Commission for granting preliminary approval for this new construction. So thank you for your consideration.
Questions on this side? Questions on this side? Thank you. All right, let's have the applicant, please. Use your presentation the way you want to and call your own people.
My name is Sam Koppler. I'm with the development team, and I have Tobias Stroh here from J&S Design, who's the lead design architect of the project.
Tobias Stroh, J&S Architects from Denver, Colorado. I just want to speak a little bit to how the design of the building has evolved and how we arrived where we are today. I don't know, Jan, or if somebody could call up the main rendering of the. Thank you. So we of course read the staff report asking for additional masonry consideration on the main facade of the building, but I wanted to just explain a little bit on how we arrived at the design that we currently have and how that ties to the context and why we are feeling very strongly about. And this is cutting in and out a little bit. Hopefully you can hear me. Feeling very strongly about the way that it is designed and currently shown. And that is that we are dealing with a fairly varied context, as you could see from the photographs surrounding the site. There are different scales of buildings. There's different materiality. And so what we're achieving with the design, the way that is shown now, is that we're stepping down the building from a massing standpoint visually and using a lighter material on the northerly portion of the building in order to step down towards the smaller structures that are located along Maryland, namely the corner building that contains Bar Louie and then Maryland Plaza itself. The other consideration that has been very important to us in the material selection is that the colors of all the surrounding buildings, as you saw from the photographs, varies greatly. So we try to not compete with any of the existing structures in that context by selecting, firstly, materials that are already present in all of these, but then going with a different color palette that provides a nod. For example, we are proposing this very dark masonry on the building that kind of picks up on the base of the Maryland Plaza building, that dark color, but does not try to match either the York House or the Maryland Plaza building for coloration. So there's a little bit of a contrast. The other important aspect of that is it's calling attention and stepping up the building in impact at the main entry to the hotel, or the future proposed entry to the hotel. The plaster finish itself on the lighter mass of the building is intended to be a highly refined finish, which is why we provided a recent project that we completed, and we also have some sample materials that you've seen, but we're not 100% enthralled yet by the actual execution of those samples. So we want them to be a higher quality level. It's a limestone finish that we're going for, and we know that can be achieved because we just did it recently. The other remaining piece that we discussed also with the neighbors was that we never actually finalize the exact color of the materials until we are able to do a field mock-up. So what we're really looking for is, and asking for, is ultimately an approval of the massing and expression of the building the way we have it. Understanding that both the detailing would be shared in the future and also the actual final colors would be reviewed in a mock-up. And with that, I mean, if there are questions, I'm here to answer those.
Questions on this side? Questions on this side? Mr. Robinson, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Koppel, anything else from your presentation? Okay. Rusty Keeley? I'm part of it. Oh, you're part of the presentation? Commissioners, this concludes, apparently, our testimony. Commissioner Richardson, we've got a motion down there?
Preservation Board grant preliminary approval of the proposed new construction with the condition that additional brick be considered for the front facade and that exterior details and materials be reviewed and approved by the CRO office.
Second.
Don, did you get 1 second out of those 3? Discussion. Commissioner Richardson?
I think it's a great design, a great use for that site.
The verb considered is pretty vague. Staff had wanted the verb added. We switched to added.
Yeah, in the back of the report, they said considered. In the front, they said added. I'm okay with added.
I second that change.
For the second, who was the second?
Who was the second?
I have Randy Vines and
I was
Tiffany
one.
Hamilton.
I was 1 second.
Are you okay with added instead of considered?
Sure.
Are you okay, Tiffany?
Yeah.
Okay. So the motion is amended as noted, considering that to be a grammatical change. What else? Mr. Byzantino?
Nothing.
Commissioner Vines, you're a detail person.
I think it's a good project.
Jonas?
I'm excited.
I mean, this looks like a big old giant Robinson, except it has more windows.
Yeah.
You okay with this?
I am, yes.
Okay, Commissioners, there's a motion on the floor that has been made, corrected, seconded several times, and discussed. I'm going to call a roll. Commissioner Vines, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Hamilton, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Chairman Kennedy, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Byzantino, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Killeen, do you vote yes or no?
Yes?
Commissioner Richardson, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Robinson, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
That is 7 yeses. The motion carries. Thank you. We're done.
Well, this is kind of a material change to something that we didn't, by saying considering adding brick, it's something that, we have considered. We've been through several design iterations, and saying that we're going to add brick, we don't really know where we stand as far as, is that one brick or is that the whole thing brick? It's very unclear, and we are moving down the design process. And this is we're trying to understand, how this goes.
It's a discussion you can have with staff. Okay, calling agenda item B, 300 South Broadway.
This is a preliminary review for a demolition and proposed new construction in a preservation review district in the downtown neighborhood. The staff recommendation is to grant preliminary approval for the demolition per the redevelopment proposal, or the new construction proposal, with the stipulation that they get a construction permit and have financing in place before they can execute any demolition. I have letters of support from the aldermen in the neighborhood and some letters of opposition as well I'd like to pass out to the board. So this is being considered under Ordinance 64689 as amended by Ordinance 64832. And with that, let's look at the site, or the pictures. This is a picture of the building proposed for demolition. It's 300 South Broadway. The so many places to look at it. The section of the building here is actually an addition from the 1980s. It forms the southern half of the building, the southern 3 bays. The northern half of the building is original to the mid-1890s, as is the facade along Clark Street, extending east towards 4th Street. As you can see, it's a brick building with rusticated stone foundation. It has arches and a pier and spandrel design. Here we see the site. It's at the corner of Broadway and Clark. Busch Stadium is immediately across to the west, and Ballpark Village is catty corner across the intersection. To the north of it, across Clark Street, is a garage for the stadium. Back at the primary facade again. Oh, I'm sorry. Computer. So this is the Clark Street facade. So if you look east, you can see, or rather west, I should say, you can see the ballpark in the background. In the immediate foreground on the left is part of the Tums manufacturing facility. And you can see the design of the facade along Clark Street is very similar to the design along the primary facade on Broadway, the only difference being that the entry is off of Broadway. I'd like to talk about the design of the new construction and then go over the context, because I think that'll be helpful. The primary facade of the new building is this facade, the west facade, which will face Broadway and the ballpark. It is a glass and steel curtain wall. The building is 33 stories tall. It does fit within the requirements of the zoning code for the Jefferson National Memorial Zoning District. The first floor of the building is proposed as retail space and lobby. Then there's a podium of approximately 6 stories that will house the parking. And then above that will be the apartments. The parking will have the podium will have an opaque glass so that the cars are hidden on the Broadway facade, and then it'll have regular glass above that. The north elevation, which you see on the right here, is made of concrete with punched windows. And the architect can talk more to the design philosophy of the building. Here we see the 2 other elevations of the building. Now the section down here, of course, is the Tums facility. So on the left we see the east elevation. That is the elevation that will face the old Millennium Hotel site over the top of the Tums facility. And on the right is the south elevation, which will face down Broadway South and 4th Street, which will face Interstate 64, which is elevated across a surface parking lot on the next block. So now I thought we could go around the site. Here we see the Broadway facade. The building proposed for demolition is over here on the left. The building on the right is part of the Tums facility, which fills up 3/4 of this city block. This is looking directly across the street from where the new construction and the demolition would take place. The part of the ballpark that the building would face is actually the back of the scoreboards. It's actually a low-slung section of the design of the ballpark, and it is kind of a mishmash of billboards and electronic advertising for the Cardinals. This is looking to the north across Broadway and Clark Street, so we're looking at Ballpark Village. Something that I think is very important to this project is the fact that they've now broken ground on a large 25-plus story apartment building that's also a glass curtain wall, similar to the design that's facing Broadway, which will form an interesting complement to the new design. On the left, of course, is the ballpark itself, which we were just looking at. Now we're down kind of at the other end of the block on 4th Street, on Spruce, looking west towards the ballpark. So the place where the building is proposed for demolition, the new construction is proposed, is kind of catty corner at the other end of this city block, if that makes sense. I hope folks are familiar with this part of town. On the left is a large surface parking lot here, go on the south side of Spruce, and on the right is more of that Tums facility. And here's a really fantastic modern industrial building that is also for the Tums facility, going north on the west side of 4th Street towards the core of downtown. Up ahead, you see the ballpark parking garage, which was part of the original Busch Stadium development there. Here we're on Clark Street. So the ballpark garage we were just looking at is kind of immediately on the left. You can't really see it. On the right here is part of the building proposed for demolition. And here is more of the Tums facility. Clark Street's an interesting street because in a lot of ways it really functions almost like an alley. It's really a secondary facade for the Tums facility. And then across the street from that you have the ballpark garage, which folks can talk about the aesthetics of it, but is it's not a really pedestrian-friendly block, I would say, at this point. And now we're back at the front facade. So what I'd like to do now is go through the criteria in the ordinance and evaluate those. First criteria, as we know, is a redevelopment plan. There is no redevelopment plan in place that calls for the demolition or preservation of the 300 South Broadway building. The next criteria is architectural quality. Staff did a great job. I thank them for the research on this building. We believe under the ordinance it should be considered a high merit building. The building was designed by Isaac Taylor, a very prominent St. Louis architect who was very prolific as well, I might add. It also was operated as a coffee facility and a chemical facility, and it had warehouse uses and office uses in it historically. The structure is sound under the ordinance. It's currently occupied by the community college, who has a contract to sell it to the developer. Now I'd like to talk about really sort of getting into the meat of the evaluation of the project. The next component is urban design. In terms of urban design, let's see if we can. I'd like to talk about these two buildings. There is a high degree of compatibility between the existing structure and the Tums facility. That can't be denied. They're both brick. They both have a pier and spandrel design. They're relatively close in age. So to that extent, there's a great deal of compatibility here. I will say that the urban design of Clark Street, in my mind, leaves a lot to be desired. It's really treated as kind of the back of the Tums facility, and on the other side of the street is a parking facility for the ballpark that is of little aesthetic value, I think it's fair to say. I did want to point out something about the streetscape and the new design of the new building. The entry for the automobiles is here on the north facade, and that corresponds with the sort of part of the facade right here for the new construction. And now I'd like to switch to talking about the next criteria, which is proposed new construction. The new proposal, as you've seen from the elevations, is quite an ambitious project. And I'd really like to focus in this section of my discussion on compatibility and sort of the effect of being in downtown. I think a major development which will allow for this project to have context upon completion is the high-rise at Ballpark Village. This view, it's sad, I could not find an elevation of the Ballpark Village apartment building that is actually along Broadway. So in the foreground of this illustration is Clark Street is here, and then if you continued east just a little bit, you'd get to the Broadway intersection. So I'm really showing this elevation, or this rendering rather, just to show quality of the character of this sort of all glass structure, and the fact that if this building is approved, it will have company at that corner. It will not be entirely a standalone glass facade facing Broadway. I'd also like to talk about the context of downtown structures in general. I have heard criticism of this project that it is that it's not really compatible with the brick building next door, the Tums building, and the ballpark was designed to be compatible with that, with the building proposed for demolition. I mean, by nature, our downtown neighborhoods in every city in the country has a wide variety of building types, building heights, materials, etc. So I show the example here of the Equitable building here in St. Louis, where if you look at it, you've got the Equitable building, it's glass. Then you've got the old courthouse built much earlier. It's a much different kind of structure, and they're right next to each other. Then you've got the Spanish Pavilion, built in the 1960s. It's a two-story structure. Then you've got a taller concrete building that is the Hilton Hotel. And then you've got the very utilitarian Ballpark garage. An additional example I have, which is not from St. Louis, it's from Boston, is the John Hancock Tower. Again, here you see you have historic small buildings. Trinity Church is right there, it's a famous building. You have brick structures, you have short structures, you have tall structures, you have modern structures, you have older structures, and this is the nature of our downtowns. And I think that there is a place for a concrete and glass structure in the location being proposed. I'd like to talk about a little bit more about the context downtown as well. So basically, if you look from above, obviously you have the arch that was built in the 1960s. Then you have the Millennium Hotel complex built in the 60s. Pet building, I think, was built in the late 60s, early 70s. You've got the building that Deloitte is in. That's from the 1980s. The Ballpark garage, obviously, is another 60s structure. The new Ballpark and Ballpark Village is contemporary. So you have this fragment of historic buildings there. And neither side of that fragment, frankly, has compatible historic architecture designed across the street. We have other places in downtown St. Louis that already have such structures, places like Washington Avenue, places where you can find Isaac Taylor buildings right across the street from each other, the Merchandise Mart in the Curlee building. That provides much better context for his design than what is essentially a fragment of the historic neighborhood that the city long ago decided it was appropriate, or decided to allow for the large-scale demolition of this part of downtown for new construction. And those are my thoughts on the criteria for the proposed new construction. So I'd just like to summarize my thoughts by saying there are really two criteria in the ordinance that are relevant here. One of them is, are there unusual circumstances? I think the design of the new building constitutes an unusual circumstance. It's a major new development for downtown. People will say, well, this is the ballpark. It's busy all the time. Well, the ballpark's only used about 100 days a year, which means 265 days a year, it's kind of a ghost town over there. And I think that by adding these additional residential units with the new building across the street at Ballpark Village, it'll be much more lively here. And when that is combined with the lack of historic context for the existing buildings, it constitutes the unusual circumstances. The other piece of the ordinance that's relevant is it says the new building must be of equal or greater architectural design. I would posit that this is a very nice building that Isaac Taylor designed back in the mid-1890s. We have other Isaac Taylor buildings in context, as I said. And I would consider this building a building of its time. And there's nothing wrong with that. Not everything has to be innovative or different. But I would also say that the building proposed for new construction here is a very nice design that is of its time. So essentially, we're trading a building of its time in contemporary times with historic buildings that offers a lot of benefits for downtown. So with that, I'd like to say the staff recommendation is in favor of the project. I would like to add that per the recommendation, along with the building permit that should be gotten before demolition is approved, they should also demonstrate financing. The thing that I know everyone agrees on is that this building should not be demolished if the new building is not going to get built. And I want to ensure that that happens, and I think if we require financing to be in place and a demolition and a building permit to be in place, that that's the best way to make sure that that happens. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
What does financing in place mean?
Financing in place to me means a demonstration of some kind that they have the equity to do the project and that they have a lender who will give them their construction financing.
And demonstrate to whom?
That would be demonstrated to the Cultural Resources Office before we would sign off on a demolition permit.
Questions on this side?
I have two questions. Did you consider a compromise solution where the building could be saved and perhaps the new building built atop it? So perhaps maybe the two facades are saved. That's done quite a bit on the East Coast, I believe.
I'll be honest, I really didn't. This is a very tight site, and I'm not sure that there's real compatibility between the design program that the developer wants to bring and the idea of the building built on top of the existing building. That's certainly something that if the developer wants to entertain, we could discuss that. I mean, one thing I really like about this design, it is a glass building on Broadway, and the nice thing about that is, you know, the plaza got built in Clayton, and I had a developer who does these kind of buildings say to me, why would you design this building and then put in windows that looks like it's in a suburban house, in a colonial house, when you want views, you're selling views downtown, you want big windows. And if I had a complaint with the design of this building, frankly, it would be that it isn't glass on all sides. But that's something that I haven't really pushed because I'm just not sure you could do it in a way that would be really compatible, where you would really still get the feel of the original building and not just be, you know, blown away by the scale of that, you know, 24 stories above it.
Okay. And then in your recommendation, you had a stipulation that CRO staff be presented the final designs. Would the Preservation Board get a chance to see this too if we use, I mean, do we have purview over this, I guess is what I'm wondering.
By ordinance, you don't. By
You don't.
ordinance, we don't. However, you know, if the preservation, you know, you can make these other things a stipulation of approval. I don't know if there's ever been a case where it's actually come back to the Preservation Board. You know, that's really the difference between a local historic district and a preservation review district is there is a level of design review, but it isn't the same thing. And I worry that we are blurring that lines if it goes too far. But the fact is,
I would argue and have argued as recently as 10 minutes ago that it will not be back to us, that there's nothing in the preservation review ordinance that would send it back to us.
That is correct. Question. The existing structure is occupied, correct?
it is.
So where will those tenants go?
I'm not sure. The community college has some ambitious plans for their own campuses, and they may go there. The developer may be able to speak to that. I can't.
Are you sure it's occupied?
I'm pretty sure it's occupied.
The SLD fact sheet tomorrow morning for their consideration of the blighting ordinance says it is not occupied.
I had a conversation with some leadership here, and I thought it was occupied. I'm getting nods from over there from the development team.
Would you just take a peek at the SLDC fact sheet then before tomorrow?
I will do so.
Sir, can you use your mic? I can't understand you.
Okay.
So,
Questions on this side?
Richard, sorry, I have a question. So a couple questions. So is this a preliminary review or is this a demolition permit review?
Preliminary review.
Okay. And then, I guess this kind of goes to where Richard was. So I understand that on tomorrow's LCRA agenda is a proposed blighting study and starting the process for a redevelopment plan. Is that, to your knowledge, is that correct?
I have heard the sketchiest information that was in the works, but I haven't seen the document, and I can't verify that standing up here right now.
Okay.
It's probably true based on what I'm hearing up here, but I'm not aware of it.
Is the alderman signed up to speak?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then I guess the problem I'm having is, so you're justifying this under the criteria B, architectural quality, that it's okay to demolish a merit, in this case, high merit building because of unusual circumstances. So is 33 unusual? Would 20 be unusual? How many stories make what? I mean, where's the line for unusual circumstances?
I'm not sure where the line is, but I'm sure that 33 is over it. And let me take a step back. And I'm not sure I said this in my presentation, but I do not believe all high merit buildings are created equal. The standard to get on the National Register is a decently high standard as an individual building, but it's not, you don't have to be an internationally significant structure to get on the National Register. We have very wonderful buildings of local significance that are on the National Register, and that's fine. I'm just saying that purely National Register eligibility, to my mind, I like the idea that there have to be, usually a high merit building shouldn't be proposed for allowed for demolition. There has to be something about the proposal or something about the circumstances that lead to that. And how many new construction residential high-rises have we had in downtown St. Louis since 1970? Maybe a couple. So I think this is a very significant project, and to my mind, it meets the standard.
Okay.
Now, the ordinance doesn't make a distinction among buildings of high merit, does it?
The ordinance merely says that a high merit building cannot be approved for demolition by the staff, and there have to be unusual circumstances that have to be expressly noted. But the ordinance doesn't help us by telling us what those circumstances are.
Got it. Questions down this way?
I want to go back to what Commissioner Colleen mentioned earlier about how to maybe creatively incorporate the existing structure, or at least a facade or certain portions thereof, in the new tower. I've been to cities all up and down the East Coast and around the Midwest that it's no longer really a novel concept. It's actually like a preferred method of building new construction in a lot of cities that have rich historic fabric. In my view, I think especially in a section of downtown St. Louis that has really been decimated, this is one of the few corners that has an intact historic building that is occupied currently, right there.
It'll be interesting to see how you make that into a question.
Well, the question is that well, I guess then I can direct this to the developer too, but what due diligence has been done to see what might be able to be salvaged or incorporated into the new design? And, why was that maybe left out of the recommendation?
The only thing I can speak to among those things, Randy, is why it was left out of the recommendation. And that is, I do think there are some things that happen when sort of facadism is successful. One is, it's really helpful if you can set the building back far enough so you really don't experience the new construction from the street. So it feels like when you're walking down the sidewalk, it feels like you're only seeing the original streetscape. And I went to school in Washington, D.C. There's a great example of that right near GW. And the reason it works is because they kept a large portion of the building intact, and then they built behind it far enough that if you're on the sidewalk in front of the building, you can't see that building. And the new building's only 2 or 3 stories taller, or 3 or 4, than the old building. So you still really experience that historic structure. I think when you have to take a structure and put it smack on top, which I suspect you would have to. Here, the developers can speak to this more. If you have to put that wall even with the wall, or almost exactly even with it, and then you're going to go up 20 plus stories, the scale becomes kind of out of whack. The buildings, I've seen examples of this, and I think for high-rise construction on top of smaller buildings, I'm not impressed with the examples I've seen.
Thanks.
Further questions? Further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's hear from the applicant.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you on this subject. My name's Jim Fredericks. I'm an attorney with Armstrong Teasdale, and I represent the developer. And in connection with that, please let me explain that the developer is both a local developer and a joint venture with a international developer out of Chicago. They are the same team that put together the 212 office building in Clayton with great success, and they're trying to replicate the project down here in the city of St. Louis. In connection with that, with me today, I have a representative of the local developer, Mr. Mark Carley. Mark Carley was a principal and managing partner of Stone Carley and Company, who, as you may have read in the newspaper a year ago, merged with BDO USA. Also with me to speak on some of the questions that you have raised already today is Mr. Jack Halloran. You've probably seen him in the newspaper. He's been the one who's been quoted the most. He is with HDA Associates, and he's here to answer any questions regarding the new construction. Also with me at this time, I'll introduce him more, but a little bit greater, is Mr. Fred Lafser, president of Lafser and Associates. He's also here to discuss issues relative to the historical significance of the architect and the architecture of the building. What I'm here to do more than anything else is to summarize what we're doing and to introduce the people that are going to be answering the questions, and to maybe focus, use me as the point person to have other people answer the questions. So call me an MC if you like, call me whatever you want, but just call me on any questions that you want. The issue primarily in front of the board today is the demolition. And in connection with the demolition, I can't emphasize enough what this building was and is. It's a beautiful building. The architect is not to be questioned. But is this one of the best examples of this architect? Dan has brought forth other examples of this architect throughout the city, and has shown that this particular building has been compromised in many respects. Mr. Fred Lafser and Jack Halloran will discuss this in more detail, but is there anybody on the board who doesn't understand that this building has basically a wrap around it? That this building is really two buildings, and that to the immediate east of this building was an alley, and the alley was filled in to look like the current building, and that the building was expanded to the south to look like the current building. I'm seeing some questions as you look, so I'm going to pass something out if I may.
Give it to Adana, please. Give it to Adana.
Yes, thank you.
Would you pass these out?
Yes.
I'll keep one for myself. There should be enough to go. One of you may have to share. David, we got one for you? There we go.
I think we're good.
The original building is the building that is shown in red. And as you can see, if you hold it with the print at the top of the page, you can see that over to the right-hand side, which is to the east, there is a portion of the building. And if you follow that to the south, you will see that it connected to an alley at one point in time. Everything else to the south of that red building is a filler building. So what we really have is only a portion of this beautiful structure which I like myself, but it is not all historical. Only a portion of it is historical. With me today is Fred Lafser. I'm going to read his bio real quick. Civil and engineering, master's degree from Washington University. Served as director of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources under 3 governors. Prior services as the director of Missouri State Parks and Historic Preservation. Served as state historic preservation officer for 8 years. After government service, Fred created Lafser and Associates, a development consulting service he has led for 25 years and has participated in over $2 billion of project construction primarily in St. Louis. He served as historic consultant for the first state tax credit project in 1998 and has worked with over 500 historic tax credit projects since, plus over 2,000 buildings that have been included in numerous historic districts. Because of all the questions that have been asked regarding the historics, I'm going to bring Fred up at this point in time. Fred?
Jim, Fred Lafser, president of Lafser and Associates, and I suppose most of that is relevant because of persistence and longevity. But we are here today to support the staff recommendation, and we are in the business of helping preserve buildings normally, and this is a building that we were asked to look at very carefully. And there's no question that Isaac Taylor is one of the most important architects that we have had in our city, and he's done many, many great things. And we've had the privilege of helping preserve many of his works, Merchandise Mart, Municipal Courts Building, LaSalle Building, B. Hadley Dean, and a number of others that are around the city, and that they are truly wonderful examples of his work. In looking at this building, it's been, when I first looked at it from the street, it was like, wow, this is a building that's clearly eligible for the National Register. And then we were asked to go through and we looked at it, and there are a number of things that caused me to question that. I think ultimately it probably could be placed on the National Register, but I do think that when you go through, the interior's been completely eliminated and rebuilt. We have new windows, and the addition to the south is interesting because as amazing as it is that they recreated the facade of the historic portion of the structure, that's actually not an appropriate enlargement for several reasons. I think the standards require that when we enlarge a building that several things happen, and that is that we try to make it look different rather than make it look similar. So as wonderful as it is that they made this replica of a historic building, it actually is something that might hurt its eligibility because it's an attempt to magnify what's there rather than highlight the differences. Another issue, when the enlargement was made, it appears that obviously the wall on the south side is now partially eliminated. If you go through the interior, the structure is clearly still there, but the walls in between the columns and beams were largely removed to create a pass-through so that the buildings would read as one building when you're in the buildings. And that's another item that is used to evaluate whether enlargements are appropriate. And then I think we're also required to have at least 75% of the original walls, and it would be questionable whether or not we have that with the south and east walls having been compromised. So I think the question with if we were to pursue a nomination for this building, the way the current state staff is looking at buildings, we've had some issues like this with other projects, and they're much more, I don't know what you'd say, much more difficult to work with when it comes to trying to place buildings on the National Register. And I think while it would possibly be approved, it's not certain. There was a question raised about the incorporating the facade and building over it or around it, and that brings in in my opinion, that would disqualify the building from being eligible for the National Register, because we have a sightline requirement. If we enlarge a building with a rooftop addition, it generally has to be kept back from the facade far enough so that when you're standing across the street and you look at it, the sightline study shows that the addition or the enlargement is not visible to the passerbys on the sidewalk. And in this case, there's really no way to hide a 30-story building in a situation like that. And I think if I let the architect comment on the structural capability of the foundations to support that, but I think the incorporating, and I don't have a lot of experience where it's been successful, but I think in general, the buildings that have been preserved by keeping the facade. I know there's a bunch of those in Georgetown where the facade is there and new buildings are behind it, and they literally held the buildings together with timbers until they could build the structure. But I'm certain those were not tax credit projects and eligible for National Register significance. So I think there's some challenges with this, and I think we go back to the history of this body, and I think it was actually created, and your ordinance allows you to make exceptions for this, and we have an opportunity to create a new building that hopefully with the staff's input per their recommendations and the building commission, that we have an opportunity to create a new landmark. And I think of the 500 buildings or so that we've been involved with, I think almost all of them are second and third generation footprints on top of what used to be historic buildings. And it doesn't minimize what we want to preserve, but I think there are situations where we can look at what we will have as opposed to what we might lose. And I think that is what your debate really is about. And I think the issue in this situation is, it's really kind of a question of looking forward to what future generations might consider landmarks. I've had, looking at the photograph, the Mansion House district was put in, 50, 60 years ago, and numerous important buildings were destroyed for that, along with the arch grounds as well. But so now we have these Mansion House towers, and we've been working with the developers on that as a historic redevelopment. It's listed on the National Register. Right across the street from other buildings, a security building, the Marquette building nearby, that are extremely important. And we have this cultural mix that we have down a block away. That so I think the effort to put into making sure the new building happens, if there is a demolition permit, was a sound recommendation from the staff that there be a condition, and I think they wanted to have some look at the plans as well, which I don't know if that's in your purview or authority or whose decision that is, but I think we do want to make this a building that is clearly a landmark in the future. We have another similar buildings over on Grand with the Union Plaza. They're sitting on top of the old Missouri Armory, where all the weapons for the Civil War were stored, and that's where the Southern sympathizers were about to storm the building and take the weapons, and I guess the group of Irish people from North Side showed up and defended the armory. Well, the armory is gone, and the new building, Union Council, Plaza, was put in its place. Those are buildings that we placed on the National Register 10 years ago, and I'd have to say that landmarks, our competitors, the city, we're not real happy about that. We were accused of compromising the National Register, and along with the other 5 mid-century modern buildings that we put on before, that was a buzzword that everybody was after. And 5 years ago, those same groups were lying in front of the bulldozers, and probably in front of this group, trying to prevent the developer from demolishing the Flying Saucer building, which became suddenly overnight one of the most important landmarks in the city. And fortunately, the developer recognized that and had a change of heart. So I think this cultural heritage is important. I think it is evolving. We have a very strong, rich past, and hopefully we have a very, very strong, rich future. I leave that to questions, if you may.
Since you were in front of that, you can have the first question.
I was. Kudos for the Council Plaza nomination, and
Thank you.
was one of those people. Question, a couple questions. Is there a site plan that we're able to see for the proposed building?
I will, I think the architect will be up next, and he can refer to that.
Can you tell me if other sites adjacent to this one were considered for the new construction? I know there are quite a few surface parking lots in the adjacent parcels. Were any of those pursued at all?
That's not in my bailiwick. I'd have to give that to Jim Fredericks as well. Sorry.
And I guess maybe this is another one for him too. Status of financing for this project. Are we
I
in the
know that
early
I'm not the lender.
Okay. Thanks. That's all I have.
Commissioner Vicentina? Mr. Colleen?
No, sir.
Commissioner Rich?
So the staff classified this as a high merit building. What would you classify it as under our ordinance?
I'm not sure I'd go with a high merit recommendation, because I do think that there's been enough compromise to it, and it would be a question. I'm not in the business of making that distinction like the staff is, but I don't think this is one of Isaac Taylor's most important buildings, and I don't. I know as it stands today, it's been modified substantially, and we might have trouble getting it on the National Register.
Okay, but for purposes of reviewing this, and the architectural quality is the second category, and you know, so we need to classify it as high merit, qualifying, or non-contributing under our ordinance. So if you had to pick one of those, which one is it?
Merit.
Thanks.
No.
Commissioner? Commissioner Robinson? Thank you. Mr. Fredericks, what's next?
In addition to the information, I certainly don't want to reiterate what Fred Lafser had said, but I want to add to it. He particularly referred to the compromise of the building due to the construction to the south and the potential construction above it. But there is also compromise on the building itself. I'd like you all to turn to your report on pages 8 and 15, if you would. You can sort of look at both pages at the same time. Halloran will talk a little bit more about this, but I do want to call it to your attention while you're still thinking on the subject. If everybody is there, you can see better on page 15 the two-story limestone base. That was not original. That was added when the filler to the south was added and the filler to the east was added, so that it had the continuity of structure to create and complete the wrap. So keep that in mind, that that was a compromise to the building itself. The same thing is true with respect to the cornice at the top of the building. That is a sheet metal cornice and not concrete that was added all around the building to give it a look of unanimity. And of course, you can obviously see the brand new windows, which are not part of the original structure. Along the lines, again, with the constructing, Mr. Vines, I'll have Jack Halloran address that specifically for you. Jack?
Sorry, one question.
Yes,
So
sure, David.
the wrap that you're talking about, the
Right.
filler, what's the date of that then?
We believe it's in the 1980s.
Okay.
So to move the slides, is there a clicker or something that I can use to move the slides? Or do I go over there?
You might want to come over here and do it yourself.
Okay. I'll get Tyson.
Or I can do it for you, or have one of your
Have Tyson
team.
film it. While Tyson's getting set up, the existing, the expansion of the building increased the size of it by about 55%. The original building is about 7,000 square foot of floor area, first floor, corner area, and then the wraps around the building. It was designed by Yarger Architects. Bill Yarger designed that in 1985. So I'd imagine it was under construction 86, 87. Okay. The other comment is we did look at trying to work with the existing structure being about 15,000 square foot of footprint and working it with parking and trying to make parking within the building and all, and we quickly, and our structural engineer quickly said, you can't do this. You can't use these two different construction types, the weights of that, they're not seismic, they're not designed for the load, you can't build on top of it. So that's what led us to then knowing that we needed to change and construct from the ground up. Okay. Well, Tyson's got a presentation here. These are the slides of that we submitted to Cultural Resources. And this one first just shows the location of the building, so everyone's familiar with that. This shows the site plan that we were talking about earlier with the fronting on Broadway and at the corner of Broadway and Clark. So you can see the Tums building wraps around it and it's adjoining it. When they did the wrap, there's a firewall there that extends up above the Tums buildings. And you can see it's diagonally from Ballpark Village 2. Okay. This is the first floor. You can see the purple area is the retail component. Towards the south there is the entry to the apartments and back of house operations behind that. You can see the core in the center with the elevatoring and the fire stairs, egress stairs. And then off of Clark you can see our loading zone behind the retail and then our entry to the parking garage. And you can see here on the parking garage, it's repetitive as it goes up, and it just circles one side loaded for parking for our residents. We're about 0.9 per unit. I might tell you that the unit mix is going to change. The neighborhood association asked us to add more 3 bedrooms, so we'll probably have fewer units. So we'll end up changing that, and the parking ratio will probably go up. But that's the repetitive kind of core that goes up through the building with the parking. Then the typical floor has 12 units on it that wrap the core area. When we get to the 16th level, we have a amenity level and an outdoor terrace designed at the 16th level to be able to look into Busch Stadium. And then on the very top of the building, we have a pool and a gathering area and grill area and some indoor lounge area. And then on the back side, we have our mechanical systems, our chillers, and so forth. So let's just go straight to the rendering. So here we have a rendering of the building, and one of our criteria was to not have a podium design. A podium meaning parking below the building that would be open air, and we elected to bring the facade all the way from the top of the building to the ground plane on both street frontages, so that so the building would look as one building and not be a podium with a glass building on top of it. So we got pretty excited about that. The west facade that you see here is the first faceted design, glass wall design of any building in St. Louis area, and it's been done in a couple other places, but not here. And it'd be similar to a diamond, reflecting light from its different facets. So it's going to take on not just a monolithic wall, straight wall. It actually goes in and out at about a 9-inch offset to create that look that you see reflected there with the sky. We have 3 different glasses for the building. We have the vision glass. They're all the same product. During the day, they all look the same. But the glazing out the apartments is clear glazing. It's floor to ceiling, so it's a lot of glass. The bottom where we have the parking, we use a spandrel glass, so you won't be on the street looking into the parking, seeing the cars or the lights for the parking. It'll just be a glass wall that comes all the way down to the top of the retail. On the corners, we decided to use an etch glass so that it would just glow at the night, but you still wouldn't be able, it wouldn't be transparent that you're looking into a parking garage. And then on the, well, there you go. That's good night rendering there. So you can see how the corners are lit up, how the ground plane is lit up, and in between is that spandrel glass where the parking is, and then up above is are all the apartments. The north elevation that you can see, go back, Tyson, to the other one, or back to the other rendering. The north elevation is concrete panels with horizontal reveals, and then large punch windows. The south and the east elevations have masonry firewall that goes up higher than what's there now, and then we set back our apartments up above by code, and then we go up with the same elevation as we have on the north side, that being the concrete, horizontal reveals, and large glass panes. On the corners of the building, let's go back to the rendering, Tyson. On the all 4 corners, we inset the corners with glass and balconies. So we don't have any interruption of the wall other than the corners were balconies. So we didn't introduce balconies anywhere other than the corners of the building. So we set back those planes, they're glass planes, and then there are balconies on those corners. So not every unit has a balcony. That's another way to say it. And I think we covered the other. Let's go to the street facade. So the street facade, here we have the sidewalk. We thought the lighting probably would pick up what's done across the street at Ballpark Village, street lighting. But here you can see the lobby entry to the apartments. It's a 2-story space. It's clear. Have a staircase up to a leasing mezzanine, and then to the left will be retail space all along there. There we changed the glass to a clear glass so you can look through and see all the activity that's going on inside the space. And I think that pretty well describes the building, so open for questions.
Start with the architects. Commissioner Robinson, question?
Not currently.
Mr. Clean.
So you mentioned your engineer rejected using the old building because of the column grid and all that. But what about just using the facade? So you work right past all those structural issues. You have to support the facade, but you can build your building behind it. I can see, if we could go to the one that just shows the street elevation. You can see how that could actually work right here. If we just save the original structure, I mean, you're all testifying that, you know, a big portion of this big thing isn't original. If we save the original structure, this part could still make it to the street and just build around those 2 facades of the original structure. Did you all consider that idea in your design?
We considered the entire building and keeping it, not just the corner. The contractor's advice was, I don't know how I get in there and put 70-foot piling in and do all the things I need to do and support that wall and not have it fall down. So it was pretty much negated. Our structural engineer wasn't too keen to it, and thought we'd have a ton of problems with it also.
Well, perhaps it's a thought to talk to some other folks maybe who've done that in the East Coast. I mean, this type of thing, it's not new to the world. So would that be a deal killer if this board...
I think it would be a deal killer as we put the model together for the construction cost and figuring out how to put this project together. I think that would probably add a few $1 million, I would think.
Okay.
So I think it would be a deal killer. I think the deal's pretty tight right now. So we, unlike Ballpark Village, we don't have what they're given in terms of incentives. So we're trying to make this as best we can and make it a signature quality building with what we can fund and put together. And I think anything we do that adds $1 million kind of tilts the scale.
Thank you.
Let's try an engineer next. Commissioner Byzantiner?
I should have brought an engineer.
I don't have anything right now.
Okay, we're down to lawyers.
No questions.
Okay.
I have a
I
question.
got one.
Okay, now a real
You don't see many of these all glass buildings, and I know the demand is somewhat high, just speaking to the public. Have you gathered information as to what the demand would be for something like this
You mean
downtown?
in terms of leasing it?
Correct.
We had a 4-member team come into St. Louis and do an analysis of the existing inventory, the existing rental rates, the competitiveness of the Central West End, out to our project in Clayton, and pretty much determined there's not a comparable market nearby. So we're
And they were working with CBRE.
and CBRE too was involved in that. So we're setting a new benchmark for rents and in St. Louis. And it's interesting because those that aren't from St. Louis, like the development team and all, really believe in this product and the rent structure that people are going to be here and they're going to lease it. That this project combined with Ballpark Village is only a plus, and no hesitation in going forward.
And
Us
what-
here, we are always fearful that we're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. No. Having lived in D.C. and Chicago, it's exciting. But how many, what percentage of the building will be 3 bedrooms? Because I know they're lacking 3 bedrooms.
Well, we're going to revisit the project. We made a commitment to the neighborhood association that we'd get 10, 12 3-bedroom units and not increase the height. We have a height limitation of 751 over mean sea level, I believe it is. So we can't add a level. I think there's a good chance with our core, the way we're reworking it, we may end up a level less than what we have and still have the number of units. So we need to work through that. Yeah.
You have legislator, anything? Okay, the guy
Yeah.
who changed himself in front of the bulldozer.
This is true. I'm going to redirect the question from earlier that I had, if other sites were considered, and let me just qualify the question. Here we have a site in downtown St. Louis that on one side is an unsightly parking garage, on the other side is an even more unsightly surface parking lot. And just to justify whether due diligence has been done, whether other parcels with less controversy associated with them were considered or pursued in any way, and what the outcome of that was. And my real concern is that, if I were on the market for a contemporary apartment with great views, I certainly would not want a surface parking lot on one side and a parking garage on the other. And I just wanted to see if you could speak to that, any alternative sites that might lend themselves well to a development of this magnitude.
There are surface lots that aren't for sale, but there are surface lots. The most nearby one is not for sale, and the guy paid a lot of money, so I'm not sure what his future plans are. But in terms of the investors, this is the site. This is Main and Main. This is where the urban density is going to be, and this is where they want to play off both projects, Ballpark Village and this project, and all the street activity that's going to take place. So this is part of this project. Your question being successful is to be at this location.
Thank you.
And the views into the ballpark, Mr. Carl. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank several people in connection with this, particularly Dan Krasnoff and his office, Paul Zink and St. Louis Community College, who worked hard with us on this project, and also with the Downtown Neighborhood Association, who also came up with great ideas in connection with this project. Going forward, I would like to say that the applicant is willing to accept all the conditions that were raised by the report, and we're willing to move forward. And in connection, if the board is willing to give us our request for this, we please, let's see if I remember this, please include in your motion to have the demolition and the conditions added to the development agreement. Did I get that right, David?
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks. That's all for me. Thank you.
question raised about the financing. How much
I believe.
did they miss
We'll
that?
ask. Mr.
Okay.
Fredericks, did you answer the question about financing?
No, I didn't. Okay.
Commissioner Hamilton, your question?
No, I was just wondering how much financing's in place right now, and if it's not all in place, how much longer do you believe it'll take to get there?
Well, the beauty of this project is our joint venture, my client's joint venture on this is CA Ventures. It's a $1 billion company. And they have a series of waterfalls of how they put this together with different investors. And their position on this is that this is a go. So we were not too worried about that. I do not have all the particulars. I will tell you that the financing joint venture agreement is about 3 inches thick. That's the best I can give you. At some point in time, I'd be glad to go over it in more detail.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
The reporters present, thank you, Commissioner Hamilton. Okay, commissioners, there are people who are signed up to testify. Lucy Hannigan.
Thank you, Mr. Callow. I'm just a citizen that drives by that building often, probably like you all do, and I'm just here to ask the Preservation Board to preserve the structure. Mr. Krasnoff talked about a variety of architectural buildings that are in St. Louis that give the St. Louis area its identity, and if that building is removed, then that is one of the varieties that is no longer there. There's the book you've all seen, St. Louis Now and Then. I would hate to see this building be in that book. And St. Louis needs its distinctive architecture to define itself as the city we are and the city of the past and the future. And so I think it's important to maintain these structures, not just these, but a lot of the other historic buildings that we have in St. Louis, so we can identify with them and we can value them and appreciate them for all time, because we do need that variety. We do need the old and the new. This is a lovely building. I like the building very much. I like the diamond aspect of it. The light pollution is a problem. There was a big article in the paper about that not too long ago. You know, light pollution is an issue. But it's a beautiful building, and I hope it can be built, but I would rather it not be at the expense of that beautiful building. St. Louis is interested in sustainability. It's not sustainable to keep destroying our beautiful architecture. Thank you.
Commissioners, I hope you noticed that was the third or fourth reference to us reading the newspaper. Mr. Barker, Mr. Kern, the people who are testifying for promoting their products. Andrew Weil. When you turned that way, I thought you were leaving.
I thought about it. My name is Andrew Weil. I'm the director of Landmarks Association of St. Louis, and I will tell the truth. First of all, I'd like to start with a couple of points of information. Just a point of information, I believe the CRO staff may have conflicting information about the date of the limestone wrap on the first floor of the building in question. Is it okay to ask if that may be the case?
I'll ask them when we're done. We have the same question up here.
Okay. So that pertains to the issue of merit. I believe this is a high merit building. I believe the CRO's assessment of that is correct. There was some question about whether or not this is the greatest work of Isaac Taylor still surviving in St. Louis. I would argue that that's irrelevant for what we're discussing tonight. The most important thing is its level of merit per the terms of the ordinance. All it needs to be is a merit or a high merit building, as it is in this case, for us to evaluate it based on the applicable terms of the ordinance. This is an exciting project. I thoroughly agree, and the feedback that I've been getting from our membership and from our board of directors and from anybody who just thinks they want to get in touch about this is that everyone's excited about this project. So I'd like to thank and commend the people behind this project for their interest in St. Louis. I think that their assessment of the future of downtown St. Louis being very bright is very perspicacious and very accurate. So that's great news. please continue to look at St. Louis and invest in St. Louis and bring great buildings to St. Louis. Unfortunately, that said, I'm here to stand up for historic preservation in this case and for our ordinance, which was created to protect our cultural heritage. Now, arguably, this building represents a greater economic investment in St. Louis than what we have here now. I don't think that's in question, or at least the project as illustrated. But this board, per the ordinance, is here to look at the impact on our cultural resources and to look at the impact that this project would have on our buildings of high architectural merit and not on the economic impact. The only way I think that the economic impact comes into play is when we address the question of, as Dan put it, the crux of the matter, which is whether or not this proposal constitutes an unusual circumstance. I think in the absence of an unusual circumstance, this proposal goes nowhere as is. And I would argue that the analysis provided by the Cultural Resources Office relies heavily or entirely on the design, the quality of the design, the so-called quality of the design, and the economic impact to justify a unusual circumstance. And I'd like to clarify that once we approve this, we have no control over whether or not this is the project that happens. That's already been established earlier in the hearing. There's no design review district here. The only thing that this recommendation requires them to do is to show the completed plans to the Cultural Resources Office. So my question is, if we're evaluating the crux of the issue, the most important issue being, do we have an unusual circumstance here that allows you all to make the decision to support the demolition of a high-merit building in our downtown? Are you actually able to evaluate that? Because we don't know if this is what we're actually going to get. They are under no obligation to build this building. None. And so, in my mind, it's really rolling the dice to assume that what we're looking at here is what we're going to get in the end. We've been burned so many times before. And I think it's really, really important not to roll the dice like this when we're dealing with high-merit historic buildings in a downtown that has far too few of them still surviving. I say roll the dice, hopefully fix the system a little bit, but roll the dice on surface parking lots being replaced, roll the dice on poor land uses being replaced, but don't roll the dice on high-merit Isaac Taylor buildings adjacent to Busch Stadium, from which, incidentally, took its architectural inspiration from the Couple Station and this building and the few surviving buildings around it. Unfortunately, with this building potentially going away and Couple 7 going away the other year, the erosion continues, or would continue, of the architectural context that justified the design of our Busch Stadium in the first place. So it's eventually it could just be this odd, even more of an odd historical throwback building in a context that has no reference point for it. So again, I just want to reiterate that I don't think it is fair to say that the design of this building and the economic investment that this building represents constitutes an unusual circumstance, because at the end of the day, there is absolutely no guarantee that this is a building we're going to get and this is the level of investment we're going to get once this other building disappears.
Mr. Kling, you want to ask your question of Mr. Weil?
Which question? I had so many already. Facade. Oh, facade. What do you think about this idea of saving the facade?
I think, in general, not a fan of the facadism approach, but I think in this case, that would be a step in the right direction that I think would actually marry the two primary criticisms, once again, tempered with excitement about this project, in that people want to see development. We need development in downtown St. Louis. But people also recognize that we've lost far too many of our original buildings, and especially buildings of high merit. And if we were able to somehow marry these two criticisms, or these two comments, into one hybridized proposal that could satisfy the needs of development and the needs of urbanism and the needs of density in this area, and also the need to protect the remains of our cultural heritage downtown, then that would certainly be a compromise that I think a lot of people, including myself, would be receptive to.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you. Jared?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jared Opsal. I'm the Executive Director of the Downtown Neighborhood Association. We represent about 725 resident members who live in downtown and about 50 small business members in downtown. I believe a letter of support was circulated earlier showing our stance on the project. By and large, our membership is very supportive of this for all the reasons earlier mentioned of adding density, adding more residents, which means for me, we're going to have more members that are going to get involved in their community and improve downtown St. Louis. The main issues we had with this project going in were, would there be retail on the first floor? We discussed that, and they were already looking at that, and they're going to have that at Clark and Broadway. The other contingency of our support was adding a community need of 3 bedrooms in downtown. It's nice to hear a realtor recognize that as well. It's definitely starting to become a problem as we're trying to look at different populations to attract from families to empty nesters that want a larger place with an office and a spare bedroom. And they were receptive of all those things, which was great. Outside of what we put in our letter, I just want to mention that our Board of Directors voted unanimously in favor of this project. Demolition and moving forward with what is in place right there on the screen that everyone has seen. And with that, I just want to know if you have any questions for me.
No?
Thank you. Thank you. Imran Hanafi?
I have It's just pictures,
Of what?
slides of the building that I'm going to talk about.
How long is it?
8 slides, but they're just pictures, and one has comments on it. So I'm Imran Hanafi, 4464 Maryland Avenue. One file on there. Okay.
Go ahead, it'll be a minute.
Feel like we have the same conversation here every few months. I don't think anybody in this room is here to say that this project is not a positive. But it's always these false choices that we're led on to, like, you can either have this or nothing. And I don't believe that. And that's why I'm here. So today I parked in the garage next door and took some pictures of the building. Because, when I saw the cultural resources report, I mean, they were really pretty bad quality pictures. And I'm like, let me see how bad this building really is. It's classic limestone brick arches. This is as St. Louis as it gets. And just for someone who's outside and walking by, it communicates so much about the foundations of the city. There's impressive brickwork, as we see in all our buildings. There's arches, go to the next one. Even in this picture, you could look at it for hours and find various different patterns, and patterns that you will not be able to replicate, even the capable firm that is building this building. If you ask them to replicate this, I doubt. And on the street level, it's gracious. It's got limestone blocks. It's got presence. It's got human scale that doesn't crush the spirit. It elevates it.
There's a cadence, there's a rhythm to it as you go down the street. It's not a boring building. It's not a dilapidated warehouse. It has a beautiful Beaux-Arts entry. It's got, somebody's taking care of it. Somebody took pride in it. And somebody took pride in it for 120 years. And now we're going to drop the ball after that many generations took care of this. That'd be a shame. So, you know, I was like, so let's lose the architecture, and especially in this part of downtown where there's very few references left. Lose the opportunity for rehab and reuse of this historic building, which will be a lower entry level for lower level retail, or maybe even cheaper apartments for that matter. Negatively impact the environment. I mean, you're going to, a lot of energy goes into firing these bricks and putting them up and creating these buildings, and then you're just going to throw it away. Plus, you're going to feed a landfill to boot. And you're going to jeopardize the other building on the block during construction because, you know, oops, you know, we didn't realize the foundations were that close, and, you know, there's a crack and this building fell. Now we got to demolish the whole block, and here's some money. But you can never recover from that. And I don't know, all projects I've seen lately come with tax incentives. And if this project has any tax incentives, that's just going to be insult to injury. And there should be absolutely none if you go forth with this. And we're already paying with all this. There should be no other incentive. And I totally agree with the facadism. If there's nothing else can be done, then save the original structure, demolish the addition if you have to. That'll give you access to do your engineering acrobats. But I feel like this is a false choice. This apartment tower, if built next door, replace the garage, none of us would be talking here. You'll have the positives of the new, and you'll have the old. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Questions? Questions?
Thank you.
Thanks. Alderman Coder?
Somebody left their glasses. Whose are these?
Person can't see them.
They're stylish. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your time and your service to our city. I'm Jack Coder. I'm the alderman of the 7th Ward. I represent, obviously, downtown, the Central Business District, and also Soulard, Lafayette Square, and McKinley Heights, 3 historic neighborhoods just south of downtown. To echo what Andrew Weil said, in part, this is an exciting project. Unlike his opinion, I do believe that this is a worthy project that is worthy of demolishing this high merit structure in favor of this new building. And I don't say that lightly. I obviously recognize I represent a number of historic neighborhoods and very active preservation districts. Downtown has its troubles. It's a very difficult environment, both on the commercial side and the residential side. Residential's been much stronger as of late, as evidenced by the 90+% occupancy rate along Washington Avenue, which are all mostly historic buildings, loft style. What downtown's lacking is much new construction, sort of higher end new construction. We see some of that with the Roberts Tower, which, as you all know, languished for years after the recession, is now online and I believe almost fully occupied. This building, coupled with what is proposed catty corner, which we broke ground on last week, the Ballpark Village Phase 2 tower, a 29-story tower. This would represent $360 million in development, basically on 1.5 city blocks, which not only would be important for downtown, it's going to bring hundreds and hundreds of residents to the downtown business district. I mean, we're talking about nearly 300 units in this building, almost 300 units in the Ballpark Village Tower. If we've got just one person in each of those units, which I imagine we'll have more, we're talking 600 plus people walking around in an area right now that has next to no residential. 400, a little bit to the south of here, is kind of an island unto its own. My hope is, that we get this building going. We get Ballpark Village is already underway, and that $9 million 1 square block parking lot that folks have talked about putting this project on, I think we'll get that developed someday. But as we stand here today, I don't believe that's for sale. I don't think the the Stadium East parking garage is either. So I do appreciate folks would prefer to save this building and do this project elsewhere, but that's not an option. This building's under contract. It's for sale. The community college, recognizing the difficulties they're facing, is wishing to move out of this building in the middle of downtown and onto one of their campuses, which I think probably makes a lot of financial sense for them. So I support the decision of the Cultural Resource staff that we approve the demolition of this high merit building with the conditions previously mentioned by Mr. Krasnoff. I am in support of those conditions and have no interest in seeing this building demolished for surface parking. I want to see it only demolished if we're going to build a 33-story luxury residential building in its place. And so I do think it's important that we put those conditions on there. Also, I believe Mr. Richardson mentioned some questions about the redevelopment agreement. Generally, we'd get the process rolling at the LCRA for any sort of incentives or blighting studies prior to the Preservation Board, but you were all meeting a week early this month, so we're here first. I will make sure, along with the SLDC staff, that appropriate checks are put in place in the redevelopment agreement calling for the demolition if you all do approve it, to make sure we've covered those bases. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Got one. You said that you don't think that the Keener garage or the surface lot are for sale. Is there any documentation to substantiate that? Has
No.
that been even looked into?
I don't have any. No, I mean, there's no for sale signs on them. I'm familiar with the
not
Keener
on
garage
this
and its
one.
owners. And I know that I'm familiar with the folks that purchased the service lot, and to my knowledge, they're sitting on those properties.
Okay. The reason I ask is because the gentleman who was answering the question earlier said that this is the spot. This is where the bank wants to finance. This is Main Street and Main Street, right?
Right.
The Keener garage also sits at the same intersection, so would have the same prime location, and it would be a lot easier for many people to swallow losing a monolithic parking garage versus a building that really, no matter how you slice it, it does embody a lot of merit architecturally and historically. And I just wanted, when we're voting on something like this, I like to be armed with as much information as possible, whether or not due diligence has been done to exhaust every other potential option. And it sounds to me that that's vague, whether or not that's been done.
Well, Commissioner, I respectfully disagree. I don't think that the current market would support demolishing a parking garage that's a whole city block to build a residential building. Down the road, I hope that's the case. I would love to see that garage eventually demolished and replaced with buildings. As we stand here today, I don't think that's feasible.
Okay, I'll accept your response. I don't know that there's any evidence to support one way or another because we really are just going based on, theory. So,
well, you're not going based on theory. You have a project in front of you that's been there's been a recommendation made. So
Right.
to say that it's theory, I think is...
Well, I guess where I'm coming from on this is that here we have this. It is so exciting. I love the idea of a groundbreaking, brand new, shiny, contemporary tower. It's going to make the skyline cool. We haven't had new construction in forever. But there again, I'm just this one sticking point. We've got a parcel that's surrounded by nothing but parking, either surface or structured parking. The lowest common denominator of urban use in a downtown setting, and there's this one building that happens to not only be a historic district intact, a historic building intact, bracing a very prominent corner, but it's also occupied and in great shape by all accounts. And that's the one building that's targeted. Never mind the adjacent parking on both sides. This is my moral dilemma, and I again, just to echo what has already been said, I'm very concerned that we've been down this road where you approve something like this and there's no protections to make sure that what is proposed is actually built. It could be like, oh, well, the circumstances have changed. The lending environment is different now. We're going to dumb it down where it's going to be a 15-story building. It may not be covered with glass. It's going to be, lower cost materials. These things happen all the time. It's not out of nowhere. This is a very common occurrence, especially in St. Louis, but all over the country. And that's just something, once we lose this building that is very, it's occupied. It's a habitable building. there's no going back. And I'm not at all convinced that research has been done as to what other adjacent parcels that have nothing on them or very low use on them have been pursued in any way.
Commissioner Weinstein, that wasn't a lecture.
No.
I'll
It was a-
witness. Would you conclude by saying,
I-
don't you agree?
Don't you agree, Alderman Coder?
No. Okay. Appreciate your comments and your question.
Anybody? Yes, Commissioner Richardson?
Wait, so tomorrow, the LCRA's meeting, you're starting the process of a blighting study and a redevelopment plan?
That's correct.
And so that should be wrapped up in January, February?
Yes.
Okay. And that redevelopment plan will call for the construction of the building that we saw and the demolition of this building?
It certainly will.
Thank you.
Have you looked at tomorrow's agenda and fact sheet?
I have not seen the fact sheet, but I have a note on my form here to call Dale and Otis and get that corrected. The building is occupied currently.
It would be terrible to ignore the community college.
Correct. And I certainly wouldn't want to demo a building with anybody inside it. So let's make sure it's not occupied.
Anything on this side? Thank you, Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee.
Director, one of the issues that has been most hotly discussed in this hearing is the quality of the existing building, which staff has characterized as high merit, and some testimony calling it merit or possibly altered so much that maybe not that. Could you repeat the reasons why you believe it to be high merit, and could you rehearse the history of the building, particularly regarding this ramp?
Well, I have to admit, I didn't fully understand the conversation about the wrap. I think I have a better idea. I had a little side conversation. Based on everything I've heard, I would still argue it's a high merit building. And there's standards within the ordinance whereby there's a standard that can be reached to allow for the demolition of that building for some purpose. And I would stick by the staff recommendation that from what I've heard today, I would still say it's a high merit building. And I still think there are unusual circumstances that justify its demolition. And I think there is architecture proposed of equal or greater architectural value. In terms of the details of the building, if you look at aerials of the building, the rear walls of the building look like above the height of the tums, that at some point the brick color is different. But that's on the back of the building, which I do not consider historically significant. Clearly, the windows are new and diminish the value, the quality of the design, in my opinion. The bulkheads and the storefronts, a lot of those details have been changed. I would say that's accurate. Here, where's the point? Maybe we can find a picture here that. Let's see. So, this isn't the best stuff to work with, but these, I had not heard this evidence before the meeting today that they've brought forward, so I'm just going on what I'm hearing. I don't have a lot of reason to believe that these pilasters have changed. See if we can get, this piece is not original. All these spandrels between, they're not original. The design of the windows, I do not believe between those pillars are original. The base of these, I do not believe is original. They're kind of a pink granite that doesn't look quite right based on the original bulkhead pictures that I've seen, where the bulkhead looks much shorter than the bulkhead that's in the building now. So there are clearly elements of the building that it seems to me that have changed, and almost none of those changed elements have made the building better than what I suspect is the original design. The details of how the state office would evaluate an application for the register based on interior alterations, we're really kind of getting granular and into the weeds at that point. The fact is the facade that's presented, I believe, is a historic facade. And the alterations that I'm aware of do not, I I'm recommending support for the project, so it'd be easy to say, oh, yeah, but I can't honestly say that with integrity, that the building has lost its historical significance, especially its exterior appearance, because of the changes that have been made. They haven't been good for the building, in my opinion. And half the building's from the 1980s, but the part that's old is largely intact, in my opinion. And I'd be open to more evidence. It's just that I hadn't heard about this before today.
Director, you're a careful writer, we've discovered. In your recommendation, you say, with the stipulation that CRO staff be presented with the final design. Normally, you write that exterior details and materials be reviewed and approved by CRO.
Well, we don't get to review a building permit. So on a building permit, we can approve or deny them. And that has real teeth, and it has the quality of law. What we have done a lot in cases like this is set up an informal review process whereby the staff is kept privy to the design evolution of a project. And I think that would be helpful here if the board is inclined to support the demolition recommendation. I do think that, the cost of demolishing this building, plus the cost of paying the community college for the building, plus the cost even for a foundation permit, you're talking tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in permit fees just to get your building permits. So I do believe requiring that building permit process be at least ongoing, if not finalized, I do believe that does have real teeth. And I there are other bites at this apple. There's a Chapter 99 plan that can have design standards in it. There are other ways to get at trying to make sure the developer does what they say they're going to do. We're somewhere between the absolute force of law and, oh, these are just paper recommendations. I don't think they're just paper recommendations. We don't have the same ability we do on a building permit in a city historic district.
Okay. Any questions for our director?
Well, I just want to say again, so I don't think it really matters about high merit, because again, what the ordinance says is high merit, merit, or qualifying. And there's only 4 choices: high merit, merit, qualifying, and non-contributing. And so this building is certainly either high merit, merit, or qualifying, which means it shouldn't be torn down unless there's, whatever it was, unusual circumstances.
Yeah. And we've had Mansion House, the Roberts brothers did a building. I'm trying to think of the other new high-rise residential buildings in downtown in the last 30 or 40 years. And we've got Ballpark Village, which is great. So maybe there's a trend here, but I still think that's an unusual circumstance, a 33-story building for residences in downtown.
I will throw out anybody who says Sky House.
Oh.
And I think the recommendation has teeth in place that would not allow another demolition of a building without the new construction getting built. I feel confident about that.
Okay, we're gonna take a 5-minute break. We've been going at this for 2 solid hours. We'll come back and we'll take a motion. Water. Commissioner's testimony on this matter has been completed. You have considered it. Do I hear a motion? Commissioner Killeen.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I move that the Preservation Board approve the demolition of 300 South Broadway with the following stipulations. The design of the new building, incorporate the full north and west facades of the original 300 South Broadway building into the structure. All visible facades of the new tower be designed with a minimum of 75% glass surface. The approved final design to be approved by the Preservation Board, that's design and materials. And the demolition permit be withheld until the construction permit has been approved and acquired.
Commissioners, is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, Commissioner Killeen.
Well, I believe we do have a high merit structure here, and what I was trying to come up with was a motion that would be a compromise motion that would allow the developers to build their tower. If we only save the original portion of the structure, there's ample room to get in and build their tower. It would be an engineering challenge to hold up the existing building, but it's been done before, those existing facades. And then with this idea, the new foundations for a 30-story skyscraper could be built behind the facades of the existing buildings. The other stipulation having to do with glass, I feel like we saw a nice view of the western facade of this building, but we did not really see what the remaining facades look like except in elevation. And it appears to me they might be turning their back on the rest of the city. And I want to make sure that this building looks good from Illinois, from the north, from the south, as well as from Busch Stadium.
Comments on the motion? Commissioner Robinson?
Yeah, so I guess on 95% of what Commissioner Killeen stated, I'm in agreement with. I am going to respectfully disagree with the design decision to make an attempt at facadism with this particular project. I just don't see, at least as presented, the two designs working very well together. I think the building as designed stands alone. And while I'm in agreement on the high merit, and I don't come to that decision lightly, but I believe that the new building's design stands alone and should not incorporate the existing building.
Would your preference be a motion to accept substantially the staff recommendation or a motion to reject the staff recommendation and deny the demo in preference to facadism?
My motion would be the exact same as Commissioner Killeen's, with the exception of attempting to keep the facade of the existing building.
You're all about the business of filling up buildings.
I love this
Old
building.
buildings, old buildings, new buildings, whatever buildings.
I feel like there's a huge need for this building.
So you support this motion?
I support the motion.
You would?
May I ask a question on the motion?
Absolutely.
There were just two portions of the facade?
Yes, building?
And that was the, which portion?
They're shown up here on the screen.
Keep the building?
So
Keeping the
allow them to
facades
remove
of
the
the building.
1980s edition, keep this, keep the corner. So
So just this portion?
So basically, you get the new building and the facade of a portion.
So that's
Is this-
because you're
is this
accepting
feasible?
Building.
the notion that the other portion was not a part of the original
I am
building.
accepting that. I think they've successfully argued that. I remember that project going to ball games when I was a kid.
Would that include then, not including the back portion they're talking about?
They could remove that too.
The alley, just that portion there?
Yes, sir. That's what I'm, just the historic portion of the building be maintained. So when did this go up in the 1880s? So the 1880s portion.
The original?
Yes.
Portion. That answers my question.
Commissioner Vines?
I with Commissioner Killeen's motion for the following reasons. I don't think it's a huge ask, and I don't know, admittedly, costs involved with that, but I think a facade incorporation is a lot different than stabilizing a building enough to build on top of a building or incorporating an existing structure into new construction. I think a facade is something that's attainable. It's been done. There's nothing unusual or novel about it. It's been done in cities all across the country successfully. I think it would achieve a happy medium between the historic integrity of this corner, especially in relationship to the red brick stadium, which is right across the street, while also accomplishing, I think everyone can agree that it'd be great to have a new residential skyscraper downtown. I love the idea of the density. I love contemporary architecture. I really do think that Commissioner Colleen articulated exactly my views very well, where we could maybe lead as a city that looks outside the box and just, again, outside the path of least resistance, and maybe does something more visionary, more creative, that is a happy marriage between two significant eras of architecture, form and function.
Commissioner Byzantine, if it falls down, some engineer is going to get blamed. You got a comment?
I have seen it done in a number of cities, including some in the middle part of the country and a couple places in the west. So I think it is possible to do, incorporate. I think the key will be how it's incorporated in so that it blends in.
It's possible, but not with that design.
I think it's definitely technically capable of doing it.
Commissioner Richardson, you're not normally known as the compromiser. You're sort of like the little black and white A or B binary guy.
Yeah, I'll be that tonight as well. So I think that Commissioner Clean's motion exceeds our jurisdiction. I don't think the board has the ability to redesign their project. This is not a historic district. This is not like the project that we just approved earlier tonight, which was in the Central West End Historic District and had new construction guidelines. This is one of the criteria as we look at the proposed construction, and would it equal or exceed the contribution of the existing structure. So it's kind of a yes or no, does it or doesn't it? It's not a, okay, we're going to redesign and have them save part of the facade or change the other facades. And so I think the facade condition is illogical and a poor compromise, because it's not what our ordinance says. It either complies, the demo complies with the ordinance, or it doesn't. And frankly, I think right now, for me, I think it's premature to be put in front of us. If they're getting a redevelopment plan with a blighting study, and the blighting study and the redevelopment plan says it should be demolished, then it's pretty black and white for us, because our criteria are weighted, and the number one criteria is there a redevelopment plan that says they should be building this tower? So if they'd come to us a month from now, I think it would be an easy answer. But as of today, I don't think they meet the standards. My motion would have been to table it until the LCRA's taken this up. But I can't support Commissioner Clean's because I think it exceeds our jurisdiction.
Mr. Colleen, I'll let you ponder or close, your choice.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, I just respect what Commissioner Richardson has to say. I just feel if this, perhaps my motion does exceed our purview, I'm not sure about that, but I feel that if such a high merit building is to be considered for demolition, and there is an opportunity to save a portion of it so we can remember our past while building upon it, a bright future where people are living downtown, and I think Andrew Weil made an excellent point there where he said this building inspired Busch Stadium, and if these things keep coming down, people are going to wonder, well, what did that refer to 50 years from now? And so we're a city that I think needs to preserve what it has left. We've lost so many things, and I think this motion just allows us to hold on to the past while stepping into the future. And I too want to applaud this team for even considering developing in the city. It's exciting. I'm sorry to be, I guess that burr in your side, adding conditions, but I just think this building is important enough to see if it can be incorporated into your plan.
I would
Close
argue
with that.
that just that. Okay, Commissioner, sorry, Barb, would you restate the motion?
The motion on the floor is to offer a preliminary review, design review, approving the demolition with the stipulations that the, and I may not be getting the technical things, but basically that the facade is incorporated into structure with the removal of the 1980s addition, that a minimum of 7% of the surface is glass, with final design to be reviewed and approved by Cultural Resources, and no permit to be approved and signed off by Cultural Resources until the building permit for this project is approved. And I am open if there were some technical words that you used.
Do you have it written down over there?
I do.
Will you share with?
Is that substantially the same?
Can you share with Barb?
Speaking of the microphone, my motion actually was re-reviewed by Preservation Board, not by staff.
Oh, okay. Would you like to read it into the record, because I don't want to miss it technically? Is that all right, Chairman?
Yes.
Should I go do that with my own microphone?
No, you can have mine.
Move that the Preservation Board approve the demolition of 300 South Broadway with the stipulation that the design of the building incorporate the full north and west facades of the original 300 South Broadway and the structure of 300 South Broadway into the design. Second, all visible facades of the new tower be designed with a minimum of 75% surface area of glass. Third, approval of the final design to be approved by the Preservation Board. Design and materials be approved by the Preservation Board. And fourth, the demo permit be withheld until construction permit has been approved and acquired.
Commissioners, is that motion clear?
Mm-hmm.
For anybody who does not understand the motion? No, no, sir. The motion on the floor has been made and seconded. I will call a roll. Commissioner Robinson, do you vote yes or no?
No.
Commissioner Richardson, do you vote yes or no?
No.
Commissioner Killeen, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Byzantiner, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Kennedy, do you vote yes or no?
No.
Commissioner Hamilton, do you vote yes or no? Commissioner Vines, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
See what you get for hesitating? Do you vote? Do you pass? Or what?
Yes.
By my count, there are 4 yeses, 3 nos. The motion carries. Commissioners, do we have any further business? Hearing none. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Thank you for doing my business. Please stand adjourned.